Good morning, everybody. I'm working on the Sunday message that I made last Sunday, and I usually add all the notes and verses. I'm kind of almost done with that. And so probably I'll post that tomorrow, and then I have a few teaching videos. I checked all of the news. This is just one that media meltdown over Trump's word. These are words that the media has used now the last few days. Nazi, evil, KKK, and terrorist sympathizer. The meeting that I'm talking news, these last 2 or 3 videos, which I just linked them onto the post coming up, instead of making extra posts for all these. Those who are concerned for the DACA kids, back to the immigration, they basically, I think some might have purposefully sabotaged any real possibility that we could have given real legal protection. I understand some of my conservative friends are not concerned with, they refer to it as amnesty. I understand that's a political viewpoint that many conservatives hold. That's their viewpoint. I understand. I have stated so many times. My viewpoint was that I'm pro-immigrant, and I understand that these children came to the country, their parents brought them in illegally. My position has been the liberal one on that. And so I speak not from like a pro-Trump, anti-immigrant type of perspective. I saw that there was a possibility if you really were concerned about the kids. But what I see with the media, what I see with those who have said they were concerned about them, I've seen some of them sabotage it, and I wonder if they did it on purpose. Because the meeting the famous words that Mr. Durbin, who was in the meeting, the Republicans and Democrats had a meeting after Mr. Trump did the open thing before the media and said, I want to really do something on this immigration. And of course his position is going to be, I want money for the wall. And I've said, if it was your kids and you felt you could keep your kids in the country, if you really saw them as your kids, you would say, so what? We'll give them some money for the wall for the sake of the kids. So you could have an agreement. So that particular meeting is where Mr. Trump used the term. CNN repeated that term. It just said 36 times, I was checking. I think they probably said it more. The term shithole, okay? Now understand, during that meeting, where you had conservative people that were going to be against whatever they were going to agree to, you had liberals that would be against it. So the primary thing that you should have looked for as you progressed for the legal status for the kids that came in when they were young, you should have looked for something. And what you did, what Dick Durbin did, a Democrat, and others, you then left the meeting and you reported that Mr. Trump used words that were not good to use. Then those words became a national top story to the point where you had Haitian ambassadors and others on PBS and others, what are you doing about the crisis? And then you had media figures asking ambassadors to Haiti and others, don't you know Trump called you a shithole? It was like kids repeating. Now you could have repeated words of any other former president and said, you know, he said these certain things. And so what you did, you probably sabotaged. And I think the possibility to get something on that. Now, as I looked at all those words, Nazi, KKK, and all of that, when I mentioned some of the associations that Mr. Obama had with some of the more black nationalist groups, okay? Not saying he held to those views, but he had certain associations. And the media during the Obama administration, who I did not dislike President Obama. But if you even questioned, even on policy, or you had legitimate questions, the media immediately ran and used the race card. they immediately ran and used the race card. You know, we had the infamous Charles Manson die recently. And I had a friend of mine who is really into, you know, the rock music, rock history. And I remember I was talking to him just this past week, and he said, "Oh, you know, John, he wrote the song Helter Skelter." Now, look, I know somewhat of history and somewhat of a little bit of the music and all. And I told my friend, I said, no, he didn't write Helter Skelter. I said, that was a Beatles song, Helter Skelter. And in the warped mind of Mr. Manson, those who are familiar with this tragic thing, he felt, he kind of felt he wanted to start a race war. That was that came out during his trial, the infamous Sharon Tate murder and all of this about Charles Manson. And I said, no, I said, he got that song from the Beatles, but he took lyrics and kind of, in his warped mind, possessed whatever. And so most of the people in the country, when they see that it would be terrible for any side or any group to foment a type of racial thing. And I honestly wonder if some on the liberal side of the aisle, with all this language, that man from NPR News, which is the local NPR National Public Radio affiliate, he came on the air and openly said Donald Trump is a racist on a news show. Now, I'll tell you, regardless of your political view, regardless if you are black or white, if you came out and you could have associated Mr. Obama with some of the more radical elements like I described, and if you dare made a charge like that, you'd be gone. You'd be off the air. And you are the ones that are pumping that. You liberal media, primarily, are the ones who are pumping that language. And you did indeed sabotage, because you left that, you sabotaged, I believe, any real hope to have something good with the DACA kids. And these DACA kids don't even realize it, most of them. You would have, what the media did was they preferred to have a political position against Mr. Trump. Meaning, see, now he's going to not approve it. And it's very possible that you're not going to get something now. And it's very possible that in the process of time, some of these kids are going to get deported. And I believe you sabotaged it. If I were coming to you and saying, look, we got a tough decision to make in this country on this particular issue of 800,000 children that had came in, and we want to give them protection, but this is a real tough issue. And we know there's going to be people on the right side of the aisle and on the left that we're going to have to try and bring them together. And then you have your first meeting about that, and you leave the meeting, and then you say, Trump said shithole. And then you report that, and then that rises to a crisis. What do you think the result of that is? What do you think you blew that up? And then, John, are you conservative, are you liberal? I just tried to hold the best position I feel is right. I just agreed with an opinion. I just briefly perused all the news outlets, just to see anything that's on the top of the news. I agreed with an opinion piece in the Calder Times that I just looked at, that it's time for our country to get out of these many wars that are still going on in Afghanistan and other places, because a lot of those, our children, our kids, are dying in Arab countries for no good purpose. And I agree with that, all right? I agree with that on the whole. And I just see how flagrantly the media has stoked by using that language. And even in a simplistic way, even a more moderate type of a lady like Judy Woodruff, who was the PBS, not realizing that you have now pulled national ambassadors and so forth, and you're telling them on world news, Trump called you a shithole. What do you have to say? Like kids at a playground. The media says all we are reporting, they said this in the beginning, are what Mr. Trump's going to be tweeting. We're going to hold him to account. No, what you're doing is any statement that was even made in a private conversation, you've raised to national crisis. And in so doing, probably got any hope for the so-called positions you held, you probably threw them overboard. And some in that element would prefer to have the view of this falling apart, and then in the next year or two, actually immigration, ICE agents actually deporting some of these kids. That's possibly going to happen because the political leadership that claims to represent these kids, they got a political thing out of it. They prefer to see, some on the left would prefer to see these kids that lived here their whole lives and have footage of them going back to Mexico, being deported. Some of these kids that lived in this country their whole lives, and some would prefer to see that on the left side of the aisle. And if you were advocating for your own child in a meeting, and you knew it was real important to get together and to do something, and then you left that meeting, and the person you were trying to deal with, you said, oh, he said shithole. He said it. Let's get a national thing. I heard Joe Scarborough and others say on national TV, we're going to put you in prison, Trump, and your kids. We're going after you, Mr. Trump, and we're going after your kids. There's something else about MSNBC. And I believe that they're stoking, not so much a helter-skelter. The reason I brought that up is in the warped mind of Mr. Manson. He wanted to see a race uprising in the country, which tragically we've had those in the past. Okay, Watts riots, famous times, and when you use this language, KKK, that was media language. KKK, Nazi, terrorist sympathizer, openly, publicly using that language in the media. Even a so-called moderate NPR station from Corpus Christi, the headquarters of NPR, and you had that man come on and say, Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, is a racist. Not we. That you've done great damage to the causes you pretend to support. That's what you've done. I saw an interview last night I watched part of the Tucker Carlson show, conservative on Fox News, and he had a fine black reporter, journalist. There was a conversation on race. And I understood that they were talking about, Tucker Carlson basically said, should anybody ever be discriminated against simply because they're white? Now, I'm familiar with the idea of what we refer to as reparations, and there's even biblical concepts on societies that have done wrong. But in short, there are some who hold the view that because of the history, the tragic history of this country, and I've talked about the abolitionists, if you studied some history, liberal media, I know most of my friends do study history, but the media doesn't. They seem to have no grasp on that. The overthrow of the slave trade, it began in Britain, and it began by Christian men, white men, who believed, I've covered this history before, I forget the exact name now, but it began by white influential people that were in leadership and began pushing it. This was kind of part of what we refer to as the evangelical movement. And then in this country, the abolitionists also, it began by white Christians standing up, and some radically, and white Christians, both men and women, who began, they were the ones that pushed it. They were the ones that pushed it They were writing newsletters and everything. And this was a movement that came out of the church. And Frederick Douglass, the famous former slave, who also was a Christian man, he himself was reading these newspapers from the white anti-slavery people. And when he saw the radicalness of their willingness to overthrow something that was sinful and wicked, which was slavery, that inspired him, even though he obviously had his own past with it. And that was an amazing thing if you see that. It didn't come from people that claim to be like media figures, and where they're the ones that right now are stoking the fires of racial tension in this country. If you have a true view that you hate a Mr. Obama, a Mr. Trump, a Mr. Clinton, or whoever you view, and maybe you have your particular biases, but then you come out and pump that language, Nazi, racist, KKK, media meltdown. They called him a Nazi, evil, KKK terrorist sympathizer. I'll tell you, with all of the disagreements I personally have with Trump, I would not see him as that. I'd see him as somebody that is not politically smart, but he's kind of like doing a job. And historically in this country, we've had people that knew like politics, they knew what to say, and so forth. And you said, but the media says, we're holding him accountable like we said. No. You never held other leaders accountable to anything that they said in these private conversations in that manner. The CNN, particularly, and others, when Mrs. Clinton went on a tirade when she lost the election and cursed openly, publicly, when they used defamatory language and it got violent, those reporters were told, you will not speak about what she said in private, you will cover that up as much, and one spoke about it and got fired. So you're like kids at a playground. You had an important meeting that there was a real chance for something that you claim you advocate for. And then you left that meeting and said, he said shithole, he said shithole, he said Mr. White is running for governor of Texas, the son of the former governor, Democratic governor of Texas, who passed away. Mark White, I believe, was the governor's name. But his son is running, and I read something. And he's anti-death penalty, simply because he said there's a lot of problems with the system of it. There's problems with it. And I, over time, became anti-death penalty, not because I don't think, when I looked at some of the cases throughout the country, I felt I just became anti-death penalty. And you say, well, is that a liberal view? Is that? No, it was a view I simply developed as I looked at certain things. I do believe that there are cases where the death penalty could be administrated, okay? But then if you have problems with the system, which some had brought out. So I kind of took that view over time. And you say, oh, but how could you? Just from trying to learn, trying to study, trying to look at things. And when people feel that they hold a view, like when I talked about the Planned Parenthood and the racism of that, the founding of that organization, how racist it is. And for people who hold liberal mindsets, they claim to be. They claim to advocate for the minorities. They claim to advocate for the DACA kids. And then they blew it up I wonder if they blew it up on purpose. I honestly wonder that. I wonder if the Schumers and others would prefer for you to see video of these kids being raided by ICE agents and being crying and screaming. I wonder if they want that because hatred has blinded their eyes for them to use this type of language openly. He's Nazi. He's KKK. He's evil. Don't you know when you use that language, you also appeal to those that are on that side of the aisle, that it could lead to, we had that problem with the whole thing with policing in the sense of some were crossing the line wrongfully. Black protesters, I support it. Even the Black Lives Matter in the nonviolent protests. But then some crossed the line. It was wrong. And so you have a responsibility when you speak. You don't come on NPR radio and the first 5 minutes I'm listening, you come on and say, Donald Trump is a racist. That man, I don't even know if he's a local affiliate, but it's the NPR. That man should immediately be fired. I don't care if that's your view or not, sir. You report that as news. Then you report you're stoking the flames. To that degree, you know better than the warped view of a Manson, because you've wrapped up this frenzy, and you've wrapped it up in some type of garb of, well, we're very high class, moderate, wonderful people, and I think you blew the chance for the DACA. I think 36 times CNN. John, we said we were going to hold Mr. Trump accountable. You've never held any other person like that accountable in a private conversation. I gave you the example of George W. Bush and the language he used. And you can grant it that Mr. Obama, I'm sure, has used the language, and others have used it in private meetings. And then you ran from the meeting that you were supposed to work on something, and then you said to the media, he said shithole, he said shithole, he said shithole. Let's contact Katie, have you done? And you think, and for you DACA kids, who I do support, you think that type of leadership helped you? You think the way they left that meeting and what you did now on a national scene, and then 2 days of he's a Nazi, he's a racist, he's a KKK, he's a terrorist sympathizer. Those were other statements made in the last day and a half. And you expect to get something that's productive out of that.